After years of manipulation by my cousin, I caught him shoveling snow despite claiming long COVID. I realized my anger was justified. Exploding head. I am a 31-year-old male with a 34-year-old male cousin who has always posed a challenge for me. During our childhood, we were close, but as I matured, I have discovered that he is difficult to be around. I have come to realize that he has been influencing me for years. There are other complicating factors. He likely has an undiagnosed intellectual disability and has claimed to have long COVID, having been out of work for 3 years. I suspect that many of his claims are more psychological than physical. Question: how can I reduce or limit my interactions with him without hurting his feelings? Should I confront him directly, or would it be better to take a more indirect route? A little background about me: I am currently transitioning away from a career in academia. I was recently a PhD student in music. My parents divorced when I was 11, and after that, my father kind of disappeared. He was bipolar and physically and emotionally abusive towards my mother and me. Both my parents have passed away. I did not see my father again until he passed away in 2018, and my mother had a long-standing battle with chronic illness. She suffered from multiple sclerosis, endured several heart attacks, and faced 2 strokes, the heart issues being related to rheumatic heart disease. She stopped working in 1999 and went on long-term disability. My mother succumbed to heart failure this past August. I returned home in May to care for her and handle her affairs. Since then, I have moved back to restart my life, and I am contemplating a career in nursing. My relationship with my mother was strained after my father left. We had intense arguments during my teenage years, and I was briefly thrown out of the house at 17. It was challenging being the child of a parent with chronic health conditions. I felt abandoned by my father, and I suppressed many of my own feelings to prioritize my mother's health. This has led to a significant amount of resentment. Over the years, our relationship improved dramatically. Unsurprisingly, I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Therapy has been immensely beneficial over the past several years, now that I understand the nature of my struggles. A little background about my cousin and I shared a close bond as children since we were the only 2 boys in the family. He has a sister, and his parents are divorced. He still resides with his father, my uncle, and is unemployed, having never lived independently. He is an avid gamer, to the extent that it could be viewed as an addiction. Our relationship, we grew close as children, but our relationship became more complicated as we matured. This tension began when I started playing the guitar around the age of 10 or 11. His father was passionate about the guitar, which helped us bond. Although my cousin also played the guitar, I noticed that as I progressed and became more dedicated to it, he grew jealous and sulky because of the bond I developed with his father, whom I viewed as a father figure. Issues 1. He exhibits extreme possessiveness. My cousin calls me at least once a week, wanting to hang out. His idea of hanging out hasn't changed since our teenage years. We either watch a movie or he plays a video game while I watch. Everything is dictated by his preferences, leaving me with little say. He can be quite domineering in this respect. I often endure these situations, not wanting to hurt his feelings. During our teenage years, he would sometimes call me multiple times a week, talking incessantly. Often, I would ignore his calls because it became overwhelming. 2. He often subtly insults me. He frequently makes derisive comments or delivers them with gritted teeth. I have compiled a few examples to illustrate. But I started playing guitar before you. I used to play all the time, and my dad never noticed. This seems like an attempt to blame me for excelling over him or for receiving his father's praise, which conveys a sense of jealousy. I recently interviewed for a full-time position at a music store, and he replied with, "I used to work at local grocery store. Have you ever worked in retail? Do you think you can manage that?" He also conveniently forgot that he was terminated from that position. When I shared my career ambitions, he questioned, "Are you sure you can do that? Do you have a backup plan?" Meanwhile, he has been unemployed for nearly 3 years. After I moved back home into a rental, he claimed, "It's unfair because it should be me moving out on my own." 3. In recent years, he has attempted to turn me against my uncle by claiming that his father is upset with me or disapproves of my life choices. For years, He has spun a narrative that his dad is angry regarding how I treated my mother during my adolescence and my life decisions. My cousin has accused his father of being upset that I relied on my mother's money for my education, which is untrue. I financed it entirely through work and scholarships, stating that I had never had a real job. This has understandably caused me to experience emotional turmoil. I know I have been somewhat gullible due to my background, and this has truly left me feeling threatened and distressed. I spent several years harboring anger toward my uncle over this. I have come to realize that my cousin has been fabricating, or at the very least greatly exaggerating, these stories for his gain. He has been envious and resentful of me, manipulating me into being hostile toward his father. Often, when my uncle and I discuss music, or any topic, really, my cousin would simply sit and sulk with his arms crossed. 4. Additionally, he was sexually inappropriate towards me during our teenage years. When I was around 15 or 16, he put pornography on the television and implied that we should engage in sexual activity together, claiming that he did that with a friend sometimes and expressed interest in seeing my genitals. Naturally, I was repulsed and told him I was going upstairs to sleep, which I did. 5. I suspect he has been exaggerating a disability for attention. My cousin contracted COVID in 2022 and claimed to have developed physical discomfort, cognitive fog, and other issues. Before that, he was employed as a seasonal laborer. Since then, he has not worked and has undergone numerous medical evaluations, putting my uncle through extensive stress trying to identify what is wrong or if any treatment could assist his condition. However, I have come to believe that he is likely exaggerating his symptoms. He talks endlessly about his illness, yet I have never noticed any substantial changes in him. Many of the symptoms he describes are not objectively accessible. Brain fog cannot be tested, and muscle aches are subjective. The medical evaluations have returned inconclusive results, and the insurance company has denied him disability funds because they suspect he is deceiving them. Since he asserts that he cannot drive, he requested that I take him grocery shopping while his father was away. I agreed, but when I arrived to pick him up, I saw him shoveling snow without difficulty. The ironic part is that when we reached the grocery store, he suddenly claimed to feel overwhelmed and woozy due to brain fog, stating, "I shouldn't have done all that shoveling. I guess I overdid it today." However, as soon as we returned home, he enthusiastically invited me inside and wanted me to stay for dinner. I strongly believe he was fabricating symptoms because I caught him shoveling snow. This behavior is especially upsetting to me because my mother endured significant suffering and ultimately lost her battle with chronic health challenges. She would have done anything to return to work. She missed it every day, while my cousin appears to revel in the attention his condition brings him. His demeanor seems dishonest to me. 6. I suspect he has mild cognitive impairment. As a side consequence of long COVID, he underwent cognitive assessment, which indicated that he requires problems to be articulated in straightforward language, that he struggles with mathematical and logical reasoning, and may be neurodivergent. Interestingly, he interprets this as confirmation of a legitimate illness, as if COVID caused these impairments. However, he's always exhibited these traits. He had to be retained a grade in school and was required to take remedial courses at a learning center due to struggles with mathematics and reading. In my view, these assessments validate my long-standing suspicions he is mildly intellectually challenged and lacks insight into his actions or behavior. TLDR, my cousin is extremely possessive and clingy yet feels envious of me. He has tried to manipulate me by turning me against his father for years, and I naively believed him. He has been unemployed for 3 years, claiming to suffer from long COVID, but I have reasons to think he is exaggerating, and I suspect he has cognitive impairment. I genuinely wish to distance myself from him, but I struggle with establishing boundaries and do not want to hurt his feelings. I recognize that it is not entirely his fault, yet he continues to treat me poorly. I am not trying to portray myself as a victim. I understand that I have been misled due to my emotional challenges. Nonetheless, I feel anger towards him for manipulating me in this manner, even if he lacks the intellectual capacity to fully understand the impact of his actions. What course of action should I take? Story 2. Heartbroken over Aaron Swartz's death, I realized my parents' meritocracy beliefs never aligned with reality. Knowledge is freedom. This sentiment has emerged again due to recent occurrences, link below, though there are undoubtedly numerous other instances of such practices. At the time those events took place, I was completely unaware. I am not from America. I was not yet 21 when he took his own life, most probably because of the pressure from the investigation surrounding him. By that time, my English was quite poor, and frankly, so was my well-being. I am merely sharing some biographical context here because I believe there is something universal about how many of us are unaware of the truths regarding the forces that influence our lives. My parents benefited from the significant expansion of the educated workforce during the glorious 30s, or whatever term you prefer, as well as from the subsequent years rife with flawed governance and ideas that a thriving society necessitates a robust service sector. Consequently, a robust service sector will ensure a thriving society. Unfortunately, that theory did not hold up very well. At least that was the case when you lacked connections. My parents emerged from dysfunctional families. My maternal grandfather lost his father at the age of 4, while my maternal grandmother had a somewhat similar upbringing, being the child of a divorcee from the time of Vichy France, and living with her single mother and her daughter, while her brother stayed with their father. They both labored tirelessly, my grandmother especially during her youth. She was a bright student but had to leave school around the age of 10 or 12. I cannot recall the exact time, and my grandfather went from being the top student in his primary school class to the lowest when he transitioned to middle school. Situations like this occur when there is one barely educated teacher for all children aged 5 to 9, who is also occupied with her own infants during school hours, only to later regain his position as the second best student there. That was all the education money that her mother and older sister could manage to provide. The sister worked from age 12 for his schooling. He too made sacrifices. He had to assist his mother, who was derogatorily referred to as the beggar, because she received a small subsidy from the village whenever she managed to find work and earn a little money. They all endured hunger. At the end of the war, he could have been excused from military service due to his frail physique. Do you all think that food is poor for a conscript? Well, my grandfather gained 40 pounds during that time. By the time trade unions were effectively fighting for improved working conditions, he was actively involved in one. He later expressed criticism while still showing understanding toward the evolution of trade unions in France. He attributed their stubbornness to the closure of a local factory before he relocated up to Paris. In Paris, he was approached to join the corporate union, but although intrigued, he declined. Later in life, he ascended the ranks but was never able to become an engineer due to a lack of qualifications and the stigma of having once been involved with a workers' union. On my father's side, my great-grandfather was referred to as a baugnat, which denotes people from the Auvergne region who migrated to Paris, frequently working in the restaurant sector. He managed a restaurant for decades but never attained ownership. The village from which virtually all my paternal ancestry hails, my grandmother once joked that a small parcel of forest owned by my grandfather belonged to her family 5 generations prior, is situated in a remote area. During my holidays there, my great-uncle's farm resembled an 18th-century establishment. My paternal grandparents experienced a more stable adulthood, as they both succeeded in low-level public service examinations, building careers as civil servants, which was regarded very positively from the 1960s to the 1980s and remained acceptable until the 2000s. Consequently, both of my capable parents succeeded in gaining admission to one of the top 3 business schools in France. What do you expect, then? Unsurprisingly, both encountered difficulties in their careers. Networking was not their strong suit, although my father conflated it with narcissism. Nonetheless, they achieved middle-class status, though my father's costly lifestyle complicated many aspects. We grew up surrounded mostly by affluent, not exceedingly wealthy, children who resided in apartments twice the size of ours, and whose families owned a portion of 10% of their wealth, while we were renting and accumulating personal debt. Despite all of this, my parents remained indoctrinated, and continue to be so to this day, by the concept of meritocracy. I attended a nearly tuition-free university in Paris, and we were conditioned to believe we were the future elite of the nation. Due to my parents' negligence, I was largely raised by the internet. This was the internet of the 2000s and, to some extent, the early 2010s. It offered a mix of Lord of the Flies, although less violent than actual school, and presented an opportunity to learn about others and myself, to establish our own guidelines and boundaries, a self-management experience that couldn't lead to a totalitarian outcome because I could always log off, along with a utopia of seemingly limitless access to knowledge and culture. E-sports gradually enhanced my capacity for self-discipline, collaboration, as well as emotional regulation. I am no longer the type to play solely to win. I engage in play as if I intended to win, as that is the sole approach to make it enjoyable. I hold a belief that suggests all levels of society learn exactly what is necessary to comprehend their relationship with the upper levels, 40%, perform actual work, 20%, and manage those in the lower levels, 40%. I am the type of person who, by around the age of 6, would read about Moses and think, well, Moses points out who the correct God is, but from the perspective of the people, why would they trust Moses more? At that moment, I merely had a question and the persistence not to search for the easiest answer. There are two methods of conveying a rational message: simply state the message and expect the listener to share the exact same beliefs and use the same terminology to process them, or invoke an emotion and guide from that point. This is not the most suitable platform for the latter, but I will attempt it. Why would they believe Moses? Because Moses possessed authority, and he utilized that authority to further justify authority. I do not subscribe to the notion of meritocracy as I may once have. There certainly was a time I imitated my parents, but did I ever genuinely buy into meritocracy? I do not even comprehend merit as a thing in itself. If I grasp what Kant intends by that, I would categorize myself as a rooted nihilist. I possess no overarching values. Yet my existence constitutes some form of value. My actions are manifestations of values. From that foundation, I can conceptualize values, or sense that there exists an underlying principle, even if I cannot precisely define it. I empathize with Aaron Swartz. I find it distressing how our world is progressing, especially when neither his death nor the failure of authorities to respond to actual crimes far worse than what he was unjustly accused of unfold before us, garnering minimal attention and even less meaningful action. World News comments, 1x7GW1 comment MBL21C5, I did not weep over Aaron Swartz's passing because I did not know him. Years later, I cried for a character likely inspired by him, Ryan Ray. You are not safe. YouTube.com watch, V equals Y Vozy 3K75G. I found this monologue somewhat cringe-inducing and anachronistic. It is easy to foresee the future when the narrative unfolds in the past. And indeed, it was. However, we can revisit it and find significance. We were not prepared. The barriers vanished, and political tribalism obliterated all other forms of civility. Slate Star Code abridged calm. I can tolerate anything except the out-group. Security is an illusion. I recall when Jordan Peterson claimed to be an independent and an atheist. At that time, he made an interesting point. He is not the first to suggest this, of course, that the foundation of civilization is trust. Is trust born from a leap of faith, or is it instinctive? Regardless, when it is shattered, it creates chaos. But that is where knowledge and freedom of information become crucial. You know, that freedom of information on which the economic models extolled by our overlords depend, as some might label them. If you avoid falling into traps, there will always be traps like Pascal's wager or philosophical zombies. And if you do not perceive the world as merely a collection of games, but instead see yourself as both a game master and a player among other game masters, then game theory can be quite beneficial. YouTube.com watch, V equals NNN IG 9G6F A and list equals PL 848F 2368 C9. Appreciate knowledge while it remains available, and do not become overwhelmed in a sea of irrelevant trivialities. In memory of Aaron Swartz. Story 3. Met my LDRGF, had an amazing trip planned, Then she broke up with me on day 1. I came for love, ended up crying alone. I, 20, female, met my long-distance girlfriend, 21, female, in person for the first time during the spring of the previous year. We had been texting and calling every day prior to and following that meeting, thoroughly enjoying our time together. Consequently, we made arrangements for a second visit, which we also cherished. For context, we live 8 hours apart. To provide some necessary background, she has mentioned that her mother is quite homophobic, but has shown some signs of becoming more accepting. However, she has shared troubling messages between them and informed me that her mother told her she deserves to be homeless and threatened to evict her. She openly panicked before our initial meeting, suggesting we should end our relationship and jokingly mentioned finding a husband instead. Additionally, she has revealed that she suffered emotional abuse from her father and experiences several mental health challenges. Following this first incident, I made an effort to be more sympathetic and patient. A few months after our first encounter, she had another emotional breakdown, asserting that we needed to break up again, this time due to the long distance. I attempted to discuss this with her, but it felt like speaking to a wall. She did not heed a word I said, and once again expressed fears regarding her parents. She spoke over me, seemed to spiral, and snapped whenever I tried to address the topic with her, even when she reached out to me. For both of our well-being, I chose to cease communication for a while. The first time this occurred, we did not officially break up, but this time, we did, for approximately a week. It was then that she began approaching me apologetically, and we agreed to keep trying. Sometime later, when I suggested she seek therapy for her trauma, she indicated that she would. Fast forward to August of last year. Everything had been progressing well for a solid 6 months. She told me that her family was inviting me on a trip to the Caribbean with them. This was significant for me, because she had previously indicated that her parents likely knew we were back together, suggesting they were probably comfortable with our relationship. This trip would allow me to get to know them better and integrate into her family, since I had had no contact with them apart from when her parents dropped her off at our rental property. Our relationship had been thriving, with daily texting and frequent calls. I created and purchased gifts for her, some of which were somewhat expensive, and she mentioned that she would pay for an excursion for the two of us, belated birthday gifts for one another, since our birthdays are a month apart. Only her family was invited: her mother, her father, her brother, her brother's girlfriend, and her girlfriend's parents. However, my mother insisted on accompanying me so that I wouldn't be alone and worked extra hours for weeks to join me. Both of us were greatly looking forward to it as we approached our departure. Unfortunately, her flight was delayed by a day, meaning we would not meet on the originally planned date. We stayed in touch throughout the entire situation until the following day arrived. We met late that night, and I was genuinely thrilled to see her. We spent some time together, but before the trip, I had expressed concerns that we wouldn't have enough time to connect, because she mentioned that her family was not interested in socializing with anyone else and probably wouldn't include me in their plans. When we finally encountered each other, I felt her family was somewhat distant, but not in an overtly rude manner. It was more of a, "I don't know you well yet, so this is awkward" vibe. Later that evening, we finally had a chance to be alone in my room, and she immediately broke down in tears. I attempted to comfort her, and she explained that she felt she had to entertain both me, my mother, and her family simultaneously. I felt somewhat hurt but chose to remain silent. She then suggested that we should see each other weekly instead. Living across the border, this poses challenges, but I thought we had agreed to find solutions and persist. Previously, I had made suggestions she appeared open to. She clearly stated she did not want to marry at this point, but I proposed other alternatives, like me relocating for school or considering a common law partnership. Additionally, she expressed guilt for wanting me to move away from my family while being unwilling to leave hers. I reassured her that it was all right, as I would be prepared to distance myself from my sisters and aunts, and my mother would accompany me since she had already wished to move to Canada. I made every effort to comfort her, but she soon exited the room very quickly. The following morning, she sent me a message indicating we needed to talk that night. My heart sank, and I instantly knew what she wanted to discuss, though I felt somewhat ready since I had experienced this before. She ignored my messages throughout the day. Around 9 p.m., I texted her as a gentle reminder to come visit me. When she arrived, my mother was still asleep, so I took her outside to the patio. The noise had woken my mother, so I closed the screen door, but my mother reopened it to eavesdrop because she had a bad feeling based on what I had shared with her, being mindful of our history together. I had all day to consider this situation, and it bothered me that she chose to discuss this in person. While I understand that breaking up over text isn't good, in the context of a long-distance relationship, it feels somewhat different. She sobbed as she recounted her day, and feeling impatient, I asked her to get to the point since I was all too familiar with this scenario and wanted to end it swiftly. She told me that she greatly valued our time together, but was uncertain about handling infrequent visits any longer. Initially, I had intended to keep my responses brief to protect my feelings, but I ended up listening to her, holding her hand, and trying to console her. I made it clear, however, that I wouldn't take her back after this. We overheard my mother sarcastically muttering, "Oh, you're so nice," from inside the room, which prompted her to ask me to take her outside, claiming she felt unsafe, which also made me somewhat uncomfortable. During our first breakup, she blocked me on Facebook, saying she feared I would stalk her family. Despite our long communication and the level of trust I had in her, she has exhibited unexpected distrust at times. The following day, she texted to say that my mother listening in had made her uncomfortable. Personally, I wanted my mother nearby because I feared I wouldn't receive emotional support and was concerned that my girlfriend might misinterpret my words, leaving me unable to defend myself. Moreover, my mother has always respected our privacy in the past, leaving us alone the night before to have our time, but this was an exception. She concluded her text by suggesting that she would like to attempt to establish a friendship and that we could go swimming together. I was heartbroken and did not respond. It struck me that I had traveled just to see her and enjoy our time together, only for her to initiate this on the first day of what was supposed to be a week-long vacation. Later, while speaking with friends and family, I realized just how distressing this situation was. She and her family have been ignoring me both in person and through messages, and an overwhelming majority of my time there has been spent crying and waiting for it to conclude, instead of enjoying the romantic getaway I anticipated with my partner. I recall that during the last breakup, she was devastated when I insisted we couldn't remain friends while being intimate, and I am concerned that might occur again if I accepted her offer. Frankly, had she discussed this over text or at least before or after this trip, I could have possibly forgiven her, but I doubt we can be friends after this, and I have no desire to communicate with her again. Am I overreacting?